The rattling stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of the Sweetwater Springs General Store, kicking up a cloud of dust that swirled in the golden light of late afternoon. Jessica Price clutched her small carpet bag, knuckles white with tension as she stared out the window at the familiar storefronts. 3 months ago, she'd left this town with dreams of a new life. Now she returned with nothing but a broken heart and whispers trailing behind her like shadows. The year was 1878, and the Wyoming Territory was no place for a woman alone. Jessica knew this better than most as she stepped down from the stagecoach, her navy blue traveling dress, once her finest, now showing signs of wear at the cuffs. The driver tossed down her single trunk without ceremony, nodded curtly, and climbed back onto his perch. "Miss Price," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Good luck to you." There was something in his tone, pity perhaps, that made Jessica's spine stiffen. At 22, Jessica had seen enough of life to know when luck had abandoned her. She'd answered an advertisement from a man in Colorado who claimed to be a successful rancher seeking a bride. What she found instead was a drunkard with gambling debts who had planned to use her small inheritance to pay off his creditors. When she refused, he'd beaten her and thrown her out into the night. It had taken all her remaining funds to make it back to Sweetwater Springs. Whispers danced around her as she made her way down the main street. Mrs. Holloway, the milliner, ducked back inside her shop when Jessica glanced her way. Two young cowboys crossing the street tipped their hats, then leaned together in conversation, eyes following her retreating form. Mail-order bride, came back without a husband. Heard he sent her packing. Must have been something wrong with her. Jessica held her head high despite the burning in her cheeks. The scandal would follow her now. A respectable woman didn't travel alone to marry a stranger, and a decent woman certainly didn't return unwed, but she had nowhere else to go. The boarding house at the end of the street was her destination if Mrs. Tanner would even take her in. Jessica had worked there before leaving, serving meals and cleaning rooms. It wasn't much, but it had been home. As she approached the whitewashed two-story building, Jessica noticed a tall figure leaning against the porch rail. Zachary Ashford, owner of the Double A Ranch outside of town, was deep in conversation with Billy Tanner, the boarding house owner's son. When Billy spotted Jessica, his eyes widened and he nudged Zachary. Zachary turned, and Jessica felt the full weight of his gaze. She'd known him most of her life. They'd grown up in Sweetwater Springs together, but they'd never been close. He was 4 years her senior, and had inherited his father's ranch when the old man passed 3 years back. Now he was one of the most successful ranchers in the county, respected and sought after by every unmarried woman for miles. His eyes, the color of summer sage, tracked her approach, and Jessica felt a flush rising to her cheeks. There was no judgment in his gaze, only curiosity and something else she couldn't quite name. "Miss Price," he said, his voice deep and even. "Welcome back to Sweetwater Springs." Jessica nodded, struggling to maintain her composure. "Mr. Ashford, Billy." Billy fidgeted with his hat, looking uncomfortable. "Ma's inside," he mumbled before slipping away into the boarding house. Jessica moved to follow, but Zachary shifted, blocking her path. "Miss Price." "Jessica," he said, lowering his voice. "I heard about what happened in Colorado." Her heart sank. Of course he had. Everyone had. "I imagine you're here to see about your old job," he continued. Jessica nodded stiffly. "Mrs. Tanner was kind enough to hold my room for 3 months. I hope she'll still have me." Something passed across Zachary's face, something like regret. "I think you should know Mrs. Tanner has, well, she's concerned about her establishment's reputation." The implication was clear. Jessica swallowed hard against the lump forming in her throat. "I see." "Times are hard for everyone," Zachary said, not unkindly, "and people talk." Jessica straightened her shoulders. "I haven't done anything wrong, Mr. Ashford. I made a poor decision, perhaps, but I've broken no laws or moral codes." "I know that," he said quickly. "But Mrs. Tanner." The boarding house door opened, and Martha Tanner herself appeared, her plump face set in determined lines. Jessica, she said with a curt nod. I heard you were back, Mrs. Tanner, Jessica replied. I've come to see about my room and position. The older woman's hands twisted in her apron. I'm sorry, Jessica, I truly am, but I've filled your position and I don't have any rooms available. Jessica felt the blood drain from her face. But you promised, that was before. Mrs. Tanner trailed off, glancing at Zachary. Before everything changed, I can't afford to lose my respectable boarders, and several have already expressed concerns about having you back. Humiliation washed over Jessica in a hot wave. I understand, she said, though she didn't, not really. Thank you for your time. She turned to leave, blinking back the tears that threatened to spill. Where would she go now? The small hotel in town was beyond her means, and she had no family left. Jessica, Zachary called after her. She stopped but didn't turn around. You still deserve a home. Those simple words, spoken without pity or condescension, nearly broke her. She faced him, struggling to maintain her composure. That's kind of you to say, Mr. Ashford, but kindness doesn't put a roof over one's head. Zachary stepped closer, lowering his voice. My housekeeper, Mrs. Rivera, is leaving at the end of the month to join her daughter in California. I need someone to cook and clean at the ranch house. The position comes with room and board plus wages. Jessica stared at him, suspicion warring with hope. Why would you offer me this? Because you need work and I need help, he said simply. And because I know you're hardworking and honest. People will talk, she warned him, the corner of his mouth lifted in a slight smile. People always talk, I've never much cared what they say. Jessica considered his offer. Working as a housekeeper on a ranch outside of town would mean isolation, but perhaps that was better than facing the whispers and stares in Sweetwater Springs. And it would give her time to save money, to plan her next move. When would you need me to start? She asked. Tomorrow, if you can, he replied. Mrs. Rivera can show you the ropes before she leaves. I can have a room ready for you tonight. Jessica glanced back at the boarding house where Mrs. Tanner had disappeared inside. I accept your offer, Mr. Ashford, thank you. Zach, he corrected. If we're going to be sharing a roof, you might as well use my name. Jessica nodded, uncertain. Zach, then. He picked up her trunk as if it weighed nothing. My wagon's at the general store. I need to pick up some supplies before heading back to the ranch. As they walked down the street together, Jessica felt the stares of the townspeople. She knew what they were thinking, that she'd failed at finding a husband and had now set her sights on the most eligible bachelor in Sweetwater Springs. The thought made her cheeks burn. Ignore them, Zach said quietly beside her. They'll find something new to gossip about soon enough. Jessica wasn't so sure. In a small town like this, some scandals lingered for years. At the general store, Zach loaded his purchases into the back of his wagon while Jessica waited outside, unwilling to face more curious eyes. When he emerged with the last of his supplies, he helped her up onto the wagon seat before climbing up beside her. The ride to the Double A Ranch took nearly an hour, following the winding river through stands of cottonwoods and across open rangeland. Jessica had never been to Zach's ranch before, though she'd heard it was one of the most prosperous in the county. As they crested a small rise, the ranch house came into view, a two-story structure built of sturdy logs with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Several outbuildings dotted the property, and in the distance, a large barn stood near corrals filled with horses. It's beautiful, Jessica said, genuinely impressed. My father built most of it, Zach replied. I added the second story and the north wing last year. A Mexican woman in her 50s emerged from the house as they pulled up, wiping her hands on her apron. Her dark eyes assessed Jessica with open curiosity. Mrs. Rivera, Zach called as he jumped down from the wagon. This is Miss Jessica Price. She'll be taking over your position when you leave. The woman nodded politely to Jessica. Welcome, Miss Price. I will show you everything you need to know. Jessica climbed down, grateful for the woman's lack of questions about her past. Perhaps news of her failed marriage arrangement hadn't reached the ranch yet. I'll bring your things to the housekeeper's room, Zach said, lifting her trunk from the wagon. It's in the back of the house with its own entrance. You'll have privacy there. The thought of privacy of a space that was hers alone was more appealing than Jessica wanted to admit. At the boarding house, she'd shared a room with another girl and had little time to herself, Mrs. Rivera led Jessica through the house, showing her the kitchen with its large cast iron stove, the dining room with a table long enough to seat 12, the parlor with comfortable furniture arranged around a stone fireplace, and the study where Zach kept his ranch accounts. Upstairs were 4 bedrooms, Zach's at one end of the hall, a guest room, and 2 empty rooms that Mrs. Rivera explained had once belonged to Zach's younger brothers, both now married and living in California. The ranch hands eat in the bunkhouse, Mrs. Rivera explained. Miguel, the cook, takes care of them. You will only need to cook for Mr. Ashford and any guests he might have. Does he entertain often? Jessica asked, trying to gauge the workload. Mrs. Rivera shook her head. No, señorita, Mr. Ashford is a private man. Sometimes his foreman, Mr. Jenkins, eats with him, or the banker from town, Mr. Coleman, but mostly he eats alone. There was something sad about that image, a man sitting alone at that big table night after night. Jessica pushed the thought away. It wasn't her place to worry about Zach Ashford's solitude. The housekeeper's quarters turned out to be a cozy room with a separate entrance at the back of the house. It had a comfortable-looking bed, a small dresser, a washstand, and a rocking chair near the window. Someone Zach presumably had already brought in her trunk. You have Sundays off, Mrs. Rivera continued, and Saturday afternoons, unless there are guests. Your wages will be $15 a month plus room and board. It was more than Jessica had earned at the boarding house, and without the cost of lodging to consider, she could save most of it. Thank you, Jessica said. I appreciate you showing me around. Mrs. Rivera's expression softened. It is a good place to work, Miss Price. Mr. Ashford is a fair man. He does not raise his voice or make improper demands. Jessica flushed at the implication. I never thought he would. No, that is good. The older woman hesitated. I have heard what the people in town are saying about you. Jessica's heart sank. So the gossip had reached the ranch after all. Do not worry, Mrs. Rivera continued. I know what it is to be judged unfairly. My husband died many years ago, leaving me with a young daughter. People said many things about a widow working in a bachelor's home. She shrugged. But Mr. Ashford gave me work when I needed it most, just as he is doing for you now. The simple kindness in those words brought tears to Jessica's eyes. Thank you, Mrs. Rivera. The older woman patted her arm. Now I will show you the kitchen garden, and then we will prepare Mr. Ashford's supper. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of learning and adjusting to life at the Double-A Ranch. Mrs. Rivera was a patient teacher, showing Jessica how to manage the household with efficiency. Zach himself was rarely around during the day, busy with ranch work, but he joined Jessica for meals, their conversations gradually becoming less strained and more friendly. Jessica found herself watching him when he didn't notice the way his strong hands held his coffee cup in the morning, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the gentleness with which he treated everyone from the youngest ranch hand to the oldest horse in the stable. Mrs. Rivera departed for California on a Wednesday, leaving Jessica in charge of the house. That evening, as she served Zach his dinner, a hearty beef stew with fresh baked bread, she felt a new sense of responsibility. This is excellent, Zach said, breaking a piece of bread. Mrs. Rivera taught you well. Thank you, Jessica replied, turning to leave as she always did once the food was served. Would you care to join me? Zach asked suddenly. There's plenty, and I hate to see you eating alone in the kitchen. Jessica hesitated. It wasn't proper for a housekeeper to dine with her employer, but then again, nothing about her situation was particularly proper by society's standards. I'd like that, she said finally, and went to fetch herself a plate. As they ate, Zach told her about his day, the new calves born that morning, the fence repair in the north pasture, the letter he'd received from his brother in San Francisco. Jessica found herself relaxing, sharing stories of her own childhood in Sweetwater Springs. "I remember you from school," Zach said, surprising her. "You were always reading during lunch while the other girls were gossiping." Jessica smiled at the memory. Books were safer companions than people sometimes. "Is that why you decided to answer that advertisement, to find a companion?" The question was asked gently, without judgment. Jessica set down her fork, considering how to answer. "Partly," she admitted. "After my parents died, the boarding house didn't feel like home anymore. I thought foolishly, perhaps, that I could make a new home elsewhere with someone who needed me." "It wasn't foolish to want that," Zach said. "Everyone deserves a home, Jessica, a place where they belong. Even disgraced mail-order brides," she asked with a wry smile. His expression grew serious. "You aren't disgraced in my eyes, you're brave. It takes courage to leave everything familiar behind. It takes even more courage to come back when things don't work out." Jessica looked away, uncomfortable with the warmth his words kindled within her. "Well, thank you for giving me a chance, regardless." After that night, their shared dinners became a regular occurrence. Jessica found herself looking forward to those quiet evenings, to the conversations that often stretched late into the night. She learned about Zach's hopes for the ranch, his concerns about the changing cattle market, his love for this wild and beautiful land. And she found herself sharing more of her own story, her childhood dreams of adventure, her grief when her parents died within months of each other, her desperate plan to find a new life through marriage. "He seemed kind in his letters," she told Zach one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "He wrote about his ranch, about the life we would build together. By the third letter, I convinced myself I could grow to love him." "What happened when you arrived?" Zach asked quietly. Jessica's hands tightened around her coffee cup. "The ranch was barely a shack. He'd been drinking when I arrived. I could smell it on him. That first night, he demanded to see what money I had brought with me." She swallowed hard. "When I refused, he hit me, said no wife of his would keep what was rightfully his." Zach's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, allowing her to continue. "I waited until he passed out, then took what little money I had left and fled. A kind family let me stay with them in town while I earned enough for the stagecoach fare back here." She gave a bitter laugh. "I thought coming home would be a relief. I never imagined that you'd be punished for someone else's lies," Zach finished for her. "People see what they expect to see," Jessica said with a shrug. "A woman traveling alone, returning unwed, it's easier to blame me than to consider I might be the wronged party." "It's not right," Zach said, his voice low and fierce. "None of it." The weeks passed, turning into months. Jessica settled into life at the ranch, finding unexpected peace in the rhythm of her days. She tended the house with care, creating a warm and welcoming environment that even the ranch hands commented on. She expanded the kitchen garden, added flowers to the front beds, and hung new curtains in the parlor windows. In her spare time, she rode one of the gentle mares Zach had given her permission to use, exploring the ranch's boundaries and discovering hidden places, a small waterfall tucked away in a stand of aspens, a meadow filled with wildflowers, a hilltop with views that stretched for miles. Sometimes Zach joined her on these rides, showing her his favorite spots on the ranch. During these outings, Jessica found herself laughing more freely than she had in years. There was something about Zach's steady presence that put her at ease, that made her feel safe in a way she hadn't since her parents were alive. One Saturday afternoon, in late summer, they rode to a high meadow overlooking the ranch. The grass rippled like golden waves in the breeze, and wildflowers nodded their colorful heads among the stems. "My father brought me here the day he told me the ranch would be mine someday," Zach said as they dismounted and let the horses graze. "He said that a man needs to step back sometimes to see the whole of what he's responsible for." Jessica looked out over the sprawling ranch below the house and barns, the corrals and pastures, the herds of cattle dotting the landscape. It's beautiful, Zach. You've built something wonderful here. Not alone, he said, glancing at her. Every ranch needs a heart, Jessica. For a long time this place was just work, land and livestock and ledgers. He paused. It's different now. Jessica felt a flush rising to her cheeks at the implication. She'd noticed the changes herself: fresh flowers on the dinner table, books in the parlor, music from the old piano she'd convinced Zach to let her tune. Small touches that transformed a house into a home. I'm glad I could help, she said carefully. Zach turned to face her fully. It's more than that. You've brought life back to the place, back to me. Jessica's heart quickened at the intensity in his gaze. Zach, I know it's not proper, he continued. You work for me, people will talk, but I can't pretend anymore, Jessica. These past months, having you here, it's changed everything. What are you saying? She whispered, though part of her already knew. He took a step closer. I'm saying that I care for you, more than as a housekeeper, more than as a friend, even. Jessica closed her eyes, torn between joy and fear. People in town already think I came back to set my cap for you. If they knew, I don't care what they think, Zach said firmly. Do you? Did she? Jessica had spent so long worrying about what others thought, about maintaining what little respectability she had left. But here, miles from town, with the man who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect, those concerns seemed far away. No, she said finally. I don't care what they think, but I do care about you, Zach. I care too much to let gossip taint what you've built. He reached out, taking her hand in his. His palm was rough with calluses, warm against her skin. Jessica, nothing matters to me more than you, not the ranch, not what people say, nothing. When he kissed her, it was gentle and questioning, giving her every chance to pull away. But Jessica found herself leaning into him, her hands coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her fingers. It was nothing like the kisses she'd imagined as a girl, dreaming of romance. It was better, real and tender and filled with promise. When they returned to the ranch house that evening, something had shifted between them. They moved around each other with a new awareness, their conversations punctuated by soft smiles and lingering glances. The next morning, Zach announced he needed to go into town for supplies. Would you like to come with me? He asked Jessica over breakfast. She hesitated. She hadn't been to town since arriving at the ranch 3 months ago. I'm not sure that's wise. Sooner or later we need to face them, Zach said. Together, together. The word warmed her from within. All right, she agreed. Together. The wagon ride to town was filled with nervous anticipation. Jessica wore her best dress, a blue calico she'd remade from one of her older gowns and had taken extra care with her hair. Beside her, Zach looked handsome in a clean white shirt and his least worn trousers. As they pulled onto Main Street, heads turned. Jessica felt the familiar burn of scrutiny, but Zach's steady presence beside her made it easier to bear. They stopped first at the general store, where Mr. Patterson greeted them with surprise. Miss Price, Mr. Ashford, what brings you both to town today? Supplies, Zach answered easily, and the pleasure of Miss Price's company. Mr. Patterson's eyebrows rose, but he made no comment as he helped them gather their purchases. Outside, they encountered Mrs. Tanner and her son Billy, who looked distinctly uncomfortable at the sight of them. Mrs. Tanner, Zach nodded politely. Billy, Mr. Ashford, Mrs. Tanner replied, her eyes darting between him and Jessica. Miss Price, I trust you are well. Very well, thank you, Jessica said with more confidence than she felt. Miss Price has been an invaluable addition to my household, Zach added, his hand coming to rest lightly at the small of Jessica's back. The gesture was not missed by Mrs. Tanner, whose eyes widened slightly. As they continued down the street, Jessica noticed the whispers following them, saw the curious glances and raised eyebrows. But instead of the shame she expected to feel, she found herself standing taller, drawing strength from Zach's unwavering support. Their last stop was the bank, where Mr. Coleman greeted Zach warmly and Jessica with polite curiosity. As they concluded their business, the banker cleared his throat. "Mr. Ashford, the town council is hosting a harvest dance next Saturday evening. We would be honored if you would attend." His gaze shifted to Jessica. "Both of you, of course." Jessica held her breath, waiting for the qualifier that she would be welcome as Zach's housekeeper, perhaps, or that the invitation was merely a courtesy. "We would be delighted," Zach replied, looking to Jessica for confirmation. She nodded, surprised and touched by the simple inclusion. On the ride back to the ranch, Jessica couldn't contain her questions. "Do you think they know, about us, I mean?" Zach chuckled. "I'd wager the entire town will know by suppertime that I couldn't take my eyes off you at the general store." "And that doesn't bother you," he considered this. "A year ago it might have, not because I would have been ashamed, but because I valued my privacy. Now," he glanced at her, his expression softening. "Now I find I don't mind if the whole world knows how I feel about you." The harvest dance arrived, and Jessica found herself standing before the mirror in her room, examining her reflection with critical eyes. She wore her best dress, altered to follow the current fashion as closely as her limited skills allowed. Her hair was arranged in a simple but elegant style, with a ribbon Zach had brought her from town woven through the dark strands. A knock at her door made her turn. Zach stood there, handsome in his best suit, his hair still damp from washing. "You look beautiful," he said softly. Jessica smoothed her hands over her skirt. "Do you think people will always find something to talk about?" he interrupted gently. "But tonight, I suspect they'll be talking about how radiant you look and wondering what a lucky fool like me did to deserve you." The town hall had been transformed for the occasion, with lanterns strung from the rafters and autumn leaves and flowers decorating the walls. As Zach and Jessica entered, conversations paused and heads turned in their direction. For a moment, Jessica felt the old panic rising, the fear of judgment, of whispers behind hands. But then Zachary's hand found hers, warm and steady, and she remembered his words, "You still deserve a home." The music started, and Zach led her to the dance floor. As they moved together, Jessica became aware of other couples joining them, of smiles directed their way that held curiosity but not condemnation. Later, as they took a break from dancing, Reverend Wallace approached them. The older man had been kind to Jessica after her parents' deaths, but she hadn't seen him since returning to town. "Miss Price, Mr. Ashford," he greeted them warmly. "It's good to see you both." "Reverend," Zach nodded respectfully. "I've been meaning to call at the ranch," the minister continued, "to welcome Miss Price back to our community properly." He turned kind eyes on Jessica. "We've missed you at Sunday services, my dear." Jessica swallowed, touched by the simple acknowledgement of her absence. "I wasn't sure I would be welcome." Reverend Wallace's expression grew serious. "The doors of God's house are open to all, Miss Price, particularly to those who have faced hardship with grace and courage." As the evening continued, more townspeople approached them. Mrs. Patterson from the general store complimented Jessica's dress. Mr. Coleman engaged Zach in conversation about cattle prices, while his wife asked Jessica about life on the ranch. Even Billy Tanner stopped by, awkwardly apologizing for his mother's behavior months earlier. "She feels bad about it now," he confided. "Says she was too quick to listen to gossip." By the time they left, Jessica felt a weight lifting from her shoulders, the burden of undeserved shame she'd carried for too long. On the ride home, stars blazed overhead in the clear autumn sky. Jessica sat close to Zach on the wagon seat, his arm around her shoulders, keeping her warm against the night chill. "Thank you," she said softly, "for tonight, for everything." Zach pulled the wagon to a stop on a rise overlooking the ranch. In the moonlight, the house glowed with welcome, lamplight shining from windows Jessica had cleaned that morning. "I have something to ask you," Zach said, turning to face her. "Something I've been wanting to ask for weeks now." Jessica's heart quickened as he took her hands in his. "When you came back to Sweetwater Springs, you were looking for a place to belong," he began. "I offered you a job, but what I really want to offer you is a home, not as my housekeeper, but as my wife. Tears sprang to Jessica's eyes. "Zach, I love you, Jessica. I love your strength, your kindness, your determination. I love the way you've brought warmth and life to my home and my heart." He squeezed her hands gently. "I know we haven't known each other this way for very long, but I'm certain of my feelings." "If you need time, yes," Jessica interrupted, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I'll marry you, Zach." His smile was brighter than the stars overhead as he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her a kiss full of promise and hope and home. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Sweetwater Springs, with nearly the entire town in attendance. Jessica wore a new dress of cream-colored silk, ordered specially from Denver, and Zach couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked down the aisle toward him. Reverend Wallace spoke of new beginnings and of homes built on love and respect. When Jessica and Zach exchanged their vows, their voices were clear and certain. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared with a smile. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." The celebration afterward was joyful, with music and dancing and enough food to feed twice the number of guests. Jessica found herself welcomed into conversations, her hand clasped warmly by women who had once looked away when she passed. "People change their minds when given reason to," Zach murmured as they danced their first dance as husband and wife. "Or when someone brave enough stands beside those who have been wronged," Jessica replied, looking up at him with love. As the sun set on their wedding day, Zach drove Jessica home, truly home now, to the ranch that belonged to both of them. The house glowed with welcome, just as it had the night he proposed. "Welcome home, Mrs. Ashford," he said as he carried her across the threshold. Jessica wrapped her arms around his neck, overcome with happiness. 3 months ago, she had returned to Sweetwater Springs in shame, her dreams of a home and family shattered. Now she stood in the arms of a man who had seen her worth when others looked away, who had offered her not just shelter but love. "Thank you for believing I deserved a home," she whispered against his lips. "You deserved that and so much more," Zach replied. "And I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you have it all." Outside, stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky, bearing witness to the beginning of a life built on second chances and the courage to believe in love despite the odds. For Jessica, who had once measured her worth through others' eyes, and for Zach, who had built a ranch but longed for a home, the journey had just begun together.